Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connecticut Psychological Association's Social Justice Speaker Series. We are honored to have Robin McHaelen and Zoe Beardsley as our esteemed speakers. The title of our tonight's talk is The History of the Stonewall Uprising and Still Under Pressure. How psychiatric history and today's political climate shape LGBTQ plus mental health. A warm welcome to both speakers.
Thank you.
My name is Shiva, and I'm the chair of the CPA Social Justice Committee. Joining me today are our dedicated social justice members, Kyler, Andrew, Lena, and I'm hoping that Anne join us. I want to express our appreciation for Beth and all she has done to support the social justice as she takes time away from the committee. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kyler to provide you with our donors' information. Kyler?
All right. So the Social Justice Speaker Series acts as a catalyst for our shared goals of empowering ourselves, our clients, and the community we serve. And to sustain this important work, we rely on fundraising and the generosity of those who believe in the power of education and awareness of our biases and assumptions. So we sincerely thank all donors moving forward and are truly grateful to our sponsors. Your support is the foundation that keeps this vital work alive and thriving. And speaking of support, we can see that as 2026 has rolled around, our platinum sponsors, which is $1,000 and up, is consisting of comprehensive neuropsychological services for the 6th consecutive year, as well as the CPA Educational Foundation for the 4th consecutive year. And then in addition to that, Stacy Tata, a generous donation of $5,000 in memory of her beloved parents, Dr. Jack K. Plummer and Lynn Tata Plummer. And with that, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
I was going to say, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lena for additional information to be shared with you.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Planning Committee, we are delighted that you could join us this evening and sincerely hope you will continue to participate in our future speaker sessions. We are enthusiastic about Robin McHaelen's and Zoe Beardsley's presentations. As a quick reminder, the CPA Social Justice Speaker Series provides free monthly meetings to CPA members, the broader Connecticut community, and our nationwide supporters. As we engage in today's discussion, please be mindful that this is a public forum and portions of this session may be recorded. We encourage thoughtful dialogue while being cautious about sharing sensitive, confidential, or personally identifiable information in verbal comments or in the chat. I welcome you to our speaker series this evening, and we'll share Robin McHaelen's biography before handing it over to Kyler to share Zoe Beardsley's biography. Robin P. McHaelen, MSW, is the founder and former executive director of True Colors, Inc., the recipient of numerous state and national awards. Robin has co-authored 2 books, a book chapter, several articles on LGBTQ+ youth, and is considered a nationally recognized thought leader. Robin is a nationally known trainer regarding the unique concerns, challenges, and strengths of LGBTQ youth. She has provided interactive, universally well-received training to more than 30,000 teachers, administrators, child welfare professionals, healthcare providers, corporations, and various nonprofit organizations over the past 25 years. She is an adjunct professor at Central Connecticut State University, teaching intergroup communications, human sexuality, and social work with LGBTQ+ clients. She is an appointed member of Connecticut's Hate Crimes Commission and is a voting member of the LGBTQ Justice and Opportunity Network. Thank you for joining us today, Robin, and I will now pass it on to Kyler to share our other speaker's biography.
Thank you so much. And so, before I introduce our other esteemed speaker, it's my job to provide a brief overview of Stonewall's history. And so, the history of the Stonewall Uprising is going to cover what happened during the uprising at the Stonewall Inn that took place from June 28th to July 3rd. And it's going to be giving context to the events leading up to the uprising and its effect on gay rights history then and as it is present. And so Zoe Beardsley, BA, is an interpretive park ranger at Stonewall National Monument in New York City. She's originally from Arlington, Virginia, and has worked at two other national park sites before coming to Stonewall, sorry. And so now it is my distinct honor to invite our speakers to guide us through what promises to be an insightful and inspiring inspiration. So the stage is yours, Zoe.
All right, let me share my screen really quickly here. Thank you so much. So thank you so much. I know they did a bio before, but I just want to tell you this. I have been working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, two spirits, same gender, loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bigender, pangender, agender, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth for it'll be 30 years in 2027. I always start with the litany of the language, not because I have any expectation that people will remember that. And to be quite honest, that is my short list. There are way more identities and ways in which people are describing themselves and their sexuality and their gender, especially young people. So I don't bring that up really to suggest that people need to remember that. I bring it up for two reasons. One is, let me just see if I can make this turn the page. There we go. To make the point that we don't have to keep up. We just have to keep open, right? And maybe those are the two key points of a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today. We don't have to keep up. And in fact, I'm not even sure we can keep up. But we can keep open. When someone tells us who they are, we just accept and respect that. We believe them. One of the reasons I have so many words and identities is that I often ask young people how they identify. I don't ask grownups because grownups get all cranky. But I do ask young people how they identify. And then pretty much no matter what they say, I'm going to say something like, "Thank you for sharing. So what's it like to be a non-binary pansexual femme?" Just because I know what those individual words mean, I don't know what they mean to them. And sometimes that young person will say, "Nope, that's all I wanted you to know." And other times they'll go on for 15 minutes talking about how they arrived at the identities that they're currently sharing. So we don't have to keep up. We just have to keep open. And we're not going to understand all the identities that people have. I'm a cisgender woman, which means that the sex I was assigned at birth matches who I am. I don't really understand, even though social work, I'm a social worker, so empathy is a tool of the trade, right? I don't really understand what it means to be non-binary. Like, I don't have that experience. And no matter how much empathy we have, we can't really walk around in somebody else's shoes and experience. So we don't have to understand, but we can always just accept and respect. And I think I always like to start a presentation with both of those as sort of a foundation for the rest of the conversation. What we're going to be doing over the next period of time is we're going to talk about the diagnostic shifts within the various revisions of the DSM, specifically with regard to homosexuality and gender identity and expression. We're also going to talk about ways that professional organizations, cultural norms, movements, and so on impacted those diagnostic shifts in the DSM. And that I'm going to start with a very quick overview of Myers Minority Stress Framework, and to give you a sense of what the current climate is for people who with lived experience in the LGBTQ plus community. Please If you have a question or a comment, or you want me to slow down, please just throw that into the chat. The folks from the Connecticut Psychological Association are monitoring that. And you can ask questions as we go. If something comes up that you don't understand or that you want more information about, you can also ask questions when we get to the end of the presentation. I'm leaving time for that as well. But I do want to start with the minority stress model. This was created in 2003, and it was specifically associated with gay, lesbian, and bisexual folks at the time. This is a very simplistic model, representation of the model. He goes into a lot more detail on each of the different parts, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time here. The main point here is that all humans experience stress. Every human has stress, family stress, health stress, financial stress, all kinds of stress. The model suggests that marginalized humans have two additional kinds of stress that other people may not have. And the first is distal stress. And distal stress is what's going on in the environment. So what's happening out in the world that has an impact on people with lived experience. And you can think about we're living in a very polarized culture right now. And so people with a variety of different marginalized experiences, whether, Muslim, Jewish, Black, LGBTQ plus, that many people, immigrants, that are experiencing their stories all the time, that are coming in that challenge or defame or it's vitriol associated with people's lived experience. So that's distal stress. Proximal stress is how individuals internalize those messages and how it impacts the way that they see themselves, the way that they see the world. And so just a couple of examples of this. I don't know why this, there we go. So this is the current climate. In 2022, there was a record number of anti-LGBTQ plus bills. 225 bills were proposed across the country. That's in 2022. In 2023, it moved up to 500 and nearly 70 passed. Since 2024, there's been over 1,000 anti-LGBTQ plus bills proposed or passed across the country. Everywhere from the federal to the state level, and actually not this legislative session, but the session before, 39 anti-LGBT bills were proposed right here in so-called blue Connecticut. So far, 27 states have banned healthcare for trans and non-binary youth. The government has redefined gender as sex assigned at birth. And the ramifications of that, especially, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but the ramifications of that are pretty profound for trans and non-binary folks. And they just issued 2 proposals, one through housing and one through Health and Human Services and Homeland Security, that's a policy that's really designed to erase transgender people, that will hold back federal funding to any agency or organization that supports the idea that there's more than 2 genders, or that people can identify with a gender that's different than the sex that they were assigned at birth. That's going to have huge impact on hospitals, clinicians, all kinds of folks. So that's the distal stress in the current environment. After a while, people with lived experience, when there's so much vitriol, often begin to exhibit PTSD-like symptoms, high rates of anxiety, high rates of depression, easy to anger. And so right now, people are, especially trans and non-binary people and the folks who love them, are hypersensitive right now because of everything that's happening in the world. And some of the proximal stress, these are some of the impacts of proximal stress on individuals, that fear of and presumption of rejection. And so even with allies, people may be afraid to come out. I've worked with people who've now gone back into the closet, or who have sort of de-queered their out-facing information. There's some folks that I've worked with that have rechanged their name back to the name that's on their birth certificate. And so there's a fear of what's going to happen and a presumption that unless proven otherwise, they're going to be subject to rejection by other people that they meet. There's a distrust of allies, that people, even folks that they've identified as allies in the past, they're not really sure where they stand now because there's so much stuff happening in the world. That you might get people who ruminate over and over and over again on a past experience with prejudice. So something happens and it becomes the primary focus. All of their thoughts are around that. And it starts to interfere with their ability to just live their day-to-day lives. Sometimes you'll see people get a distaste for their own group following an event. So I've seen this happen, and Zoe did a great job talking about all the different sort of subgroups within the LGBTQ plus community, and that there's actually an organization called Gays Against Groomers, which is an organization that's goal is to get transgender folks to be identified as groomers and to kick them out of the LGBTQ plus acronym. And so there's a lot of that can happen. And even people, gay folks might get very upset with somebody who's recognizably gay. And so that's another potential impact. Concealment of identity, that people will try not to be out until they figure out who you are. And coming out, as you know, is never a one-time thing. It's an all the time thing. Every time you meet somebody new, you have to decide, are they safe to be truthful with, or are they not safe to be truthful? And it's not like people are wandering around going, hi, I'm a lesbian, how are you? Right? It's that people want to be able to talk about, especially if they're getting into a relationship with somebody at work or somebody in a friendship group, they want to be able to talk about their lives, and that they might not be able to talk about their lives if they're not sure that you are somebody that will be accepting of who they are. And that this I've seen a lot with youth, internalization of myths, the belief that I've worked with kids who absolutely believed they were going to hell. And since they were going to hell anyway, they could do whatever they wanted now, and took lots and lots of risks. That the myth that all LGBTQ plus people are promiscuous, that, I've worked with gay boys who thought, okay, well, I just better have, even if they didn't want it, they felt like in order to prove that they were gay and gay men were promiscuous, that they had to have a lot of sex. That feeling like they were unworthy of love. I worked with young people who put up with abusive situations because they thought they didn't deserve better. And so those internalization of myths can have a profound impact. And it's one of the things to check in with about people. And then lastly here, hypervigilance and a sensitivity to other people's responses. Often, when someone changes their pronouns and other people are getting used to that, lots of times humans make mistakes, right? We make mistakes. And if the person knows that you're trying, you make a quick apology, correct yourself and move on. And that often works. Eventually you got to get it right, but there's some space and grace for that. Right now, with the level of hypervigilance and sensitivity, that even a simple misgendering, like using the wrong pronoun for someone, can cause a really intense response. And especially, with new, if you have a client who's coming in who's new, they're going to be checking very carefully and listening very closely to how you might use language and so on, to see if you're going to be a safe person for them. So I just wanted to sort of set the framework with the minority stress model as we look at the DSM and the ways in which internal and external forces have impacted the DSM over the last few decades. Before I go into the next, start talking about the DSM, I just want to pause for a second. I can't see the chat at the moment. Are there any questions or comments or feedback before we move on?
Not yet, but we welcome if there is any
Okay.
comments or questions.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, and I know I'm talking fast. So the DSM is a living document that the changes that have happened over the years happen because of internal and external forces. And so we're going to talk about some of them, and it's continuing to change. The DSM-V-TR made a lot of language changes as language changes in the culture. So it's a living document. It does take a long time to come out with a new version, and there's a big process around that, but it is really a living document. We're only going to talk about two major diagnostic turning points today. We're going to talk about homosexuality first, and then about gender. And then you can tell from the sexual minority stress model and what's going on with distal in the environment, that history still matters and still impacts how we work with clients and how we diagnose, etc. So this is just very quick. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and then come back into. Let me just go to my right page. Okay. Cool. So in DSM-I in 1952, homosexuality was considered a sociopathic personality disturbance. And so it was a mental illness. And as a mental illness, obviously it impacts people's ability to get jobs, to get employment. It could impact their ability to adopt children. There's all ways in which having this mental disorder of same-sex attraction impacted people's lives. And Zoe talked about, the lavender scare and a lot of those pieces. In 1968, the DSM-II changed it from sociopathic personality disturbance to sexual deviation, but it's still a mental illness. And so it still has that impact and that stigma associated with mental illness. And then the DSM, and I'm going to go into how this happened in a little minute, but that in the DSM-II, that 1973, there was an event that happened at the convention, the American Psychiatric Convention, and the following year, it was removed as a disorder, but they still kept it in. It wasn't a clean break, because what happened was they created a compromise category called sexual orientation disturbance, was created for people distressed by their own orientation. So that continues to keep it in there as the problem being the fact that they were same-sex attracted, that was the problem, rather than the harassment or other things that were happening in the environment that caused the distress. And so it was removed as a disorder, but there was still parts in there that still used and stigmatized people. In 1980, in DSM-III, it became ego-dystonic homosexuality, still implying that unhappiness about being gay was still in itself a mental illness. And so a lot of the work around those times in working with people who are LGBT or same-sex attracted, were things about trying to help them not be that way. And so you might have seen some of the lobotomies and what's the one called where they use the electronic thing. Obviously today that works very differently, but in the day they were like electric shock. They used things like giving people things to make them throw up every time they had an erotic thought. And so there were all these things that happened trying to making the fact that they were distressed about being gay as what the issue was. And finally, in the DSM-III-R in 1987, they finally removed homosexuality entirely. So it was a process that went on I'm a social worker, I don't do math. So you do the math between 1952 and 1987. That's a long process to finally remove homosexuality as a mental illness entirely. And so even though since 1987, there's still and this is 2026, there's still folks who continue to treat same gender attraction as a disorder. And you can think about things like conversion therapy, and people whose job it is, or who think their job is to make people not gay. And in Connecticut passed a law that prevents licensed clinicians from performing conversion therapy. We don't know what's going to happen since the Supreme Court overturned that in one state, and we don't know how broad that's going to be. But it doesn't include there's a huge religious exemption. In fact, most of the conversion therapy that happens in Connecticut is really being done by local churches and pastors within individual congregations. So even though it's been removed, there's still people that still function as if it's a mental illness. So the pressure actually started from outside. There probably was pressure going on inside, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but pressure really started from outside. And think about the timing here, right? So Frank Kameny, if you don't know Frank Kameny, he's a gay activist. He started one of the first gay rights organizations called the Mattachine Society back in the late 50s. And he did a number of different things over the course of his life. After his firing by the U.S. Army, he became the first person to aggressively fight back by suing the government for firing him. And then he was the one that partnered with. So in 1964, that's when he started. He started really providing activism around getting homosexuality out of the DSM, making sure that it was not a mental illness. And then in 1971, he was one of the people that went to the American Psychiatric Association's convention and disrupted the convention. They did it 2 years in a row, 70 and 71. And that they, were outside. They prevented people from going in. They tried to take over the stage. And so there were all these things that were happening. And you think about Stonewall in 69, and then 70 over 1,000 or 1,500 organizations later, that the timing is not surprising that would be an area that activists would start really focusing on. That confrontation in 1971 is what led the APA to invite Kameny and Barbara Giddings to formally present at the 1972 panel. And at that panel, a gay psychiatrist who at the time was anonymous. They were so worried. Folks were so worried about being fired or losing their license that many LGBT psychiatrists and psychologists didn't come out because of the level of fear. And so Dr. Fryer spoke at the convention, but he was wearing a mask, and he identified himself as Dr. H. Anonymous. I have a very quick little video that I'm going to show you, just a part of this video, to just give you a sense of what that was like. I have to stop sharing there to go to a different place to share because I'm not technology wise enough to figure out how to do it otherwise. Here it is. Let me just make sure you can all hear this.
Imagine giving a deeply personal speech to an audience of your peers while wearing a Richard Nixon mask. Not to be silly, but to be safe. It happened 50 years ago today at a conference of psychiatrists in Texas. Dr. John Fryer revolutionized mental health care by speaking publicly about being gay. But he did not look or sound like himself. He spoke as Dr. Henry Anonymous. His microphone disguised his voice, and yes, he did wear a Richard Nixon mask. His opening words, quote, "I am a homosexual. I am a psychiatrist," unquote. Dr. Fryer's speech lasted just over 10 minutes. He made a case for the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from a list of mental disorders. Here is the final minute of his remarks.
This is the greatest loss, our honest humanity. And that loss leads all those others around us to lose that little bit of their humanity as well. For if they were truly comfortable with their own homosexuality, then they could be comfortable with ours. As homosexual psychiatrists, therefore, we must use our skills and wisdom to help all of them and ourselves grow to be comfortable with that little piece of humanity called homosexuality.
I thought it was powerful to hear from his own voice. So I wanted to share that, and the link is in the slides. So if you wanted to, you could watch that entire piece. Okay. Also, around the same time, well, actually in 1980, the American Psychological Association created, it's now Division 44. I think it was called something else when they first started. It was a standing committee that focused on, first LGB and then LGBT and so on identities. The American Psychiatric Association started their committee in 1978. So you saw that there was pressure from outside the greater community. There was pressure on the folks who are working with it, who are writing the DSM, and then there was also pressure within from folks who wanted homosexuality taken out. There was also changing cultural norms that were happening. Some of the most seminal stuff was psychologist Evelyn Hooker's research, which actually began in the 50s, where she found no meaningful psychological differences between gay and straight men on standard clinical measures. That data allowed the APA to, when they were working on the new DSM, it gave them enough coverage to say that they were following the science, not simply bowing to political pressure, even though both things were clearly happening. Great. So that's the last piece of that. Sorry. One of the things that was really fun about doing this, I usually do, most of my trainings are usually around LGBTQ youth, working with families to support LGBTQ youth, substance use and all of those kinds of things. So when I was asked to do this piece on the DSM, it gave me a great opportunity to do a lot of research and thinking, and so that's why I keep referring to my notes, because I haven't memorized some of the research that I did. So that was the first shift. The first shift was around homosexuality. The next shift is around gender. And so initially, the DSM-III in 1980 introduced gender identity disorder as a disorder, right? And that it was the first formal diagnostic category targeting trans identity. As written, the diagnosis pathologized the identity itself, not the associated stress. So what was a mental illness was being transgender, not being upset about the ways in which you were being treated as a person who was transgender. In the DSM-V in 2013 replaced it with gender dysphoria. And they did that very carefully with a lot of thought around that, because gender dysphoria places the issue on the ways in which people are treated by, the discrimination, the harassment, all the rejection, all of the things that people were experiencing as a result of their identity. So it moved the issue off of their identity into their responses to their environment. And it kept it, though, as a clinical diagnosis for a very specific reason, because what it did is it preserved a diagnostic pathway that allowed coverage for insurance. So for hormone treatments, surgical care, so it was a very deliberate reframe that also allowed people to be able to continue to access, healthcare, associated healthcare, because the insurance companies required a diagnosis in order to provide or approve any of the healthcare that was necessary, whether it was, hormones, or other forms of gender affirming care. And then the DSM-V, the newest edition, the TR, made further refinements to the language and criteria, that basically the difference that they did around the language around gender identity is that they replaced desired gender with experienced gender. And that's a very thoughtful twist, because it identifies, it puts the reality back in the person's identity, gives them the onus is in the person's identity, not in a desire to be. It's who you are, right? It's an experienced gender. That's who I am. They replaced natal male and natal female with individual assigned male at birth or individual assigned female at birth. And that they also changed cross-sex treatment regimen with gender affirming treatment regimen. One of the best practices around identifying trans folks, and sometimes because sometimes we do need to differentiate between the sex they were assigned at birth and their current gender, because, for medical reasons sometimes, and sometimes for insurance reasons, depends on what their paperwork says. So there's lots of different reasons around that. What's recommended is that we start with the person's identity. So Jane is a woman who was assigned male at birth. So we privilege, in that case, her identity as Jane, and then recognize that someone made a different decision when Jane was born. Or John is a man who was assigned female at birth. And so it continues to privilege their identity over the assumptions that people made when they looked at their genitals when they were born. And so I think that the point of this really is that this is an ongoing revision process rather than a settled endpoint. And that's true about the DSM, just in general. And there's impacts that happen based on what's going on in the world. So, for example, one of the things about both of these, not so much the gender one, but the homosexuality one of the things that it shows, that the path that the DSM has been on, is that it moved from pathologizing identity toward addressing distress and impairment. And so that's a shift that took decades and is still ongoing. And in order to make that happen, that it really required professional bodies, activists, research and cultural attitudes, and sometimes law and policies to put that into effect. The 1973 and 2013 changes both involved several of those several of those levers sort of acting together to make that happen. So, hold on one second. So I do have some other stuff that I want to share, but I want to just pause for a minute. Okay. I moved this. Hold on a second. I consider myself a technical immigrant rather than a technical native, so I sometimes struggle a little bit with the technology. I just want to stop for a second to see if anybody has thoughts, ideas, feedback, anything that they want to add to, that sort of very short summary of the DSM journey. This is the part we all talk.
Hello?
Yes, Carl.
Yeah, what you're reminding me of is a DSM conference I went to a couple of years back when they were working on the latest revision. And the presenter, by the end of a full day lecture with lots of research behind it and data, he acknowledged that the primary influence of DSM evolution over decades is two basic things. and sources of funding that are often not in public. And they're basically insurance and pharmacology.
Yep.
And that's where the diagnoses evolve from too, under the limelight. So I'll just never forget that because it seemed so accurate and meaningful. And there was so much history data that this person presented about that. So
That's great.
I just wanted to throw that in the mixer because I believe there's something to that too.
I absolutely agree. Thank you for sharing that. That does add another level of complexity and another one of the impacts of what's going on out in the world and how it impacts what's happening with the DSM. Anybody have any other comments or thoughts they want to add? Or pushback or questions?
I'm curious if there's any like V codes in the DSM that focus on minority stress, or is this something that they has kind of like kept out of the DSM?
You know what? I'm not a DSM expert, Kate, but that's a great question. And so it's something that I could research later. I don't know that the minority stress model is included in the DSM anywhere. And there is some, there's some clinicians that are pushing back a little bit on that model. I don't know specifically what the content of their argument is. I have found that argument to be that model to be really helpful in in helping people work with people who are LGBTQ plus, and also in my own life and experience of being able to support people, like checking in with the trans and non-binary folks and that I know right now, that and recognizing the level of oppression that they're experiencing. And a lot of the work I've done is with families. And so families, especially of young people, are wildly distressed. There was an executive order that implied that. So I didn't answer your question, Kate, because I don't know the answer. But there was an executive order right after the current administration came in that suggested that if a hospital or if an organization that accepted Medicaid provided any form of gender affirming care, that they would only be able to provide gender affirming care. They would not be able to provide any other services that used Medicaid. So hospitals and other organizations were faced with the decision to say, like, do I serve everybody except trans and non-binary people, or do I only serve trans and non-binary people? And even though an executive order does not have the power of law, and has not been implemented, all three of the biggest gender clinics in Connecticut have closed. Right? They're no longer providing services to youth under 19. So that's the Yale Gender Clinic, Children's Medical Center, and there were Connecticut Children's Medical Center at the time was serving about 450 families. Yale was serving over 1,000 families. And they had to come up with a new way to support those folks. And they did come up with some ways to support folks. But the only clinic right now in Middlesex, Gender Clinic was the other one that stopped. Although they are under the radar providing services to a limited number of people. The only program that exists in the state right now is Anchor Health, which is a small nonprofit. They don't take Medicare or Medicaid. And so they work on a sliding scale. So they're able to provide services to young people. And there was a court order that sort of nullified that anyway, but still some of the gender clinics in California have come back, but none of the gender clinics in Connecticut, and even Fenway in Boston, which is providing these services for many, many, many years, stopped providing services. Boston Children's Hospital is still providing services, though. So people have to travel to get those. So, and to Carl's point about insurance, now that the federal government has made a statement that there's two and only two sexes, what's going to happen with insurance companies and their willingness to provide coverage for various gender affirming care for folks? And when you think about gender affirming care, that's not just trans and non-binary folks. Getting postmenopausal estrogen support is gender affirming care. Viagra is gender affirming care, right? And so we don't know that they're going to write the laws tight enough to be able to allow those other forms of care. But it definitely is a really scary time around how that's gonna play out for people. Now, Connecticut also has statutes that protect people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. So insurance companies in Connecticut are currently not allowed to discriminate, but it's become much harder to get approvals now for any sort of larger care. And the myths and misunderstanding that's out in the public around what this is. A couple months ago, I was doing a community conversation on LGBT stuff, and an 85-year-old woman came to the community conversation simply to find out why we were cutting the penises off of 5-year-olds. And I was like, nobody's doing that. Right. But there's so much myth and misunderstanding out there. Any last comments on this before? So Lena wrote, I see a lot of people in this community struggle with going to places due to bad experiences or fear of prejudice, religious temples. How can psychologists empower individuals within the community to feel safe in these environments and build resilience when negative experiences occur? I don't know if y'all can do anything to create safety in those environments because we don't have a lot of control around those environments. I mean, resilience, as a general rule, we are a very resilient community, but our resilience is being taxed. And so there's a couple of different models that focus on sort of strength building, looking at challenges as a way of building strength and sort of incorporating some of that into it could be useful. I see, Emily, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how, if you've seen how the legislation impacts like intersex individuals, because I know that that's something where it's not necessarily identity, it's biology, but it's also both. And so how that has been impacted.
And that's going to be a really challenging thing because some intersex people identify within the LGBT community. Lots of intersex people do not, because of that difference between, for some people, it's both a biological experience and an identity. So for some people, it's both. For some people, it's just that this is how your body developed, right? And right now, they're not differentiating between trans and intersex. Although, as far as I know, nobody has stopped doing intersex surgeries, even though best practices now recommends with intersex surgeries that if the theory, if you can pee, if they can pee, let it be, right? That sometimes, with that if the urethra is in a different place or they're not able to urinate, that there may be required surgery. But lots of the surgeries for intersex children are totally cosmetic and therefore become something that they can access later if that's something that they're interested in. And that's also, some people feel really differently about that. I've talked to some intersex folks who were glad that the surgery happened when they were toddlers and couldn't remember it. Fortunately, most of the doctors now have stopped suggesting that parents keep their intersex condition a secret from their kids. That was very much the norm back in the day, and that is much less the norm now. And so, did that answer your question, Emily? Other questions or comments?
It did. Thank you.
like to wait because sometimes people, need a minute to think if they want to say something or not. I appreciate if you people put it in the chat too, because then I can also respond from the chat. Not sure that I really effectively answered the question about building resilience when negative experiences occur. But I bet that's something that y'all do a lot in your work. So what are some suggestions that you have to build resilience when clients experience negative experiences?
So I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm just gonna jump in.
Okay, just jump in.
But I thought that the question about the DSM-V was really good. And just to clarify, like right now, the DSM-V-TR does not have something that specifically delineates minority stress, which is, hopefully something that will be considered and included down the line. But and just thinking about the compounding factors, right, of stress from people who identify with multiple communities. And I will say that as a Jewish person, and being in the Reformed community, this is a huge topic of discussion within my synagogue, where like, how do we continue to foster resilience, and how do we include other groups that are marginalized, and how do we include and stand by other groups that are currently being attacked and have been attacked. And are part of our community as well. And so much of that happens, like if you have children, then having those conversations and not shying away from the scary conversations, because that knowledge and that understanding at an age appropriate level is power. And but also, what can you do for yourself to address your fears, right? And questioning what does this bring up for me? And what does this, in terms of generational impact, what does this experience feel like for me? What might it feel like for my family? How can I open up that dialogue? What might it feel like for the community around me, and the differences in that? And just having it continue to be a difficult but very open conversation, and lead into the community. Like that partnership is such a big part of building and maintaining resilience, knowing that there is power in that togetherness and in that unity. And that's been the huge focus, I can say, at least in the experience that I've had.
And thank you for bringing up the sort of intersectionality piece as well. And that's why I think that the minority stress model sort of works, because it recognizes that marginalized communities and people with multiple social identities that are marginalized have a whole nother level of distal and proximal stress. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Kate?
Sorry, I just also
Sorry.
I really appreciate, I just want to say thank you. When you listed out these things like the fear of rejection, the distrust of allies, I wrote down that entire list because it was just so helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Kate?
I was just going to bring up that something I do as a clinician is that when I have queer clients, if they bring up a place where they were really safe, I write it down and use it as an example for other people. So like, for instance, I had a patient who is doing fertility treatments now and with her partner, and they like really love their experience. So I've like written it down. They had a gynecologist that was really queer safe. And so like I wrote that down so that I can also make recommendations when I find places that I know are safe or have had good experiences, which are rarer, but I think helpful to like something that I do on the side, just to hopefully be able to share with other clients as well.
I think that's a great idea, Kate. And I would recommend that everybody do that, to look at the area that you serve and the clients that you're serving, and to identify what resources are available for them, because that community that Sarah brought up, and the connection and knowing where you can go, where you'll have a safe experience, is really important. And if you know your community, that can be really helpful. Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. Anybody else?
I was just going to add that, especially because what's safe and what is available is constantly changing. So pulling from your resources and being able to see, like you were saying, Kate, about what people's individual experiences are in 5 years, I mean, even in 6 months, that could be completely different and that could have changed. And there could be people who are switching out. So constantly getting a sense of what is appropriate and what's applicable, I think is so good because, yeah, you can't really even just keep a list because in a couple weeks and months, it could be outdated. So it's always changing.
Exactly. So I think one of the things that you might do, because I have a whole little ally section coming up for the last couple of minutes, that one of the things you could do is there's like 39 prides in Connecticut now. and some have already happened. So like Middletown, which is the biggest pride, that's about 10,000 or 15,000 people at the Middletown Pride. So Middletown's already happened, Hartford's happened, Glastonbury's happened, but there's still a bunch that have not happened yet. And if there's one happening in your area, that would be a really good place for you to go to pick up resources, because there's very often nonprofits table at Pride. And so it's a great way to connect with some of the groups that are providing services to LGBTQ folks in your community. And I on the slide later on, I do have a link to Connecticut, Visit Connecticut, I think it is, that has a list of all the prides. And so you can go there and see which ones haven't happened yet. We're more than halfway through the month. So, some have already happened. And then some actually happen in September. So New Haven Pride happens in September. Any other comments or thoughts before I go back to my slides? Okay. There's my slide. Hey, work. Okay, so these are the couple of things that I wanted to point out, that these are the two federal proposals that are currently seeking comments. And there's the first one is FR 6518 P01. It's equal access to housing and HUD program revisions. If that passes, that's going to make it very easy, much easier for anybody who provides any sort of housing services. So it could be shelters, it could be group homes, it could be foster care, it could be anybody who provides housing services will be allowed to deny services to trans and non-binary folks. So that's one of the two. And that the link that I put in there is the link to, if you want to do comments, that would be the place where you might be able to do that. And that can be the comment. You don't have to know a lot about it to do your comment, to think about, if this passes, how might that impact clients that you serve? How might that impact potentially people within your own families or communities? Telling personal stories is one of the most effective forms of comment. And so, and if you're interested, there's organizations that provide, sort of a template for doing those kinds of things. Connecticut Equality is Equality Connecticut, is one of the places. It's equalityconnecticut.org is one of the places where you can go and get, some content that would be helpful. The other one is OMB 2026-034. It would withhold federal funding from any agency or organization that supports trans and non-binary people. The ramifications of that are profound, and would essentially erase the ability for trans humans to exist in our culture and society, or to get access any services whatsoever in our culture and society. And that potentially could also impact insurance companies and what kinds of things might be supported. I think somebody's dog wants to play. So that's one idea. And the due date is coming up. It's June 30th. Here's a couple of other ideas, and then I'll ask you for any ideas that you might have. That review your agency policies and intake forms for inclusion around gender, relationships, and family status. Are the people the ways in which LGBT folks identify their gender, identify their relationships? Is there places in your intakes and in the work that you do that allows people to describe themselves as they want to be described. So for example, when I meet new people, a lot of times I'll say something like, my name is Robin. That's how I like to be addressed. My pronouns are she, her, and her, and you, hers, and you are. And so, it's a question of being able to open a door and letting people choose whether they want to walk through or not. It's also a good idea to review the environment in which clients are seen. How do LGBTQ plus folks know they are welcome? And sometimes people will say to me, well, everyone's welcome here. And I would say, especially in the current climate, people don't know that unless there's something there that tells them that. And so the last slide on here has some of the images you can get for free off of the internet if you have a color printer. And that I already said, attend or better yet, table at an upcoming Pride celebration. And that's where you can find it at ctvisit.com. The last piece I would add is not just for your work with clients, but also with everyone. When you hear mean, intervene, right? Everywhere and every time. Because if somebody says something and we don't say something, we have said something. We've said what just happened is okay with us. Now, that doesn't mean we have to be rude. That doesn't mean we have to be angry. It just could be something as simple as, ouch, or I feel differently, or tell me how you arrived at that conclusion. I feel, so there's lots of different ways to do that in a gentle way, assuming good intent and then providing new information. But I will just tell you, so many times I've seen people intervene, and then somebody will come back to them later and say, thank you for saying that. It made a huge difference for me. One tip for if you're working with folks who are trans or non-binary, ask them how they would like you to ally for them. I work a lot with kids, and so I'll ask them, if somebody misgenders you and I'm in the room, how would you like me to respond? Would you like me to respond and correct them? Would you want me to give you space for you to do that? Would you want me to just shut up? And how do you want that to be handled? Because different people want different things. And so we want to give them the opportunity to say how they want to be allied for. And then this last piece, because we're just about out of time, that we're still running the True Colors Conference, that it's going to be March 19th and 20th, 2027. It'll be at UConn and Stores. And we're creating, we started last year, and we're creating a very large professional best practices set of workshops together with the UConn School of Social Work, the School of Education, and a variety of other stakeholders to make sure that we're providing, and the SOGI Center, which is a national center, to provide cutting edge resource workshops for clinical child welfare and other helping professionals. And you can get up to 12 CECs. Right now, this is under the Health Collective. And that's where, some of the information is. We're going to be moving to the Rainbow Center sometime in the fall. And so that address will change, and there'll be a notice on that when that changes. And that, as I said, were some of the safe zones. All of these I found online for free. So they're available. So I'm gonna, and I think that the slides are going to be available to you after. And so we have 5:58. Does anybody have a last comment or thought or feedback about? I know you're going to get an evaluation form to fill out, but anybody want to add anything? Something you like, something you learned, something you wish was different?
I want to say thank you a lot, Robin. Thank you so much for providing all the information. Those are definitely, absolutely important for us, both communicating with our patients, colleagues, friends, peers, etc. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your night and enjoy the summer.
Thank you. You too. So now Andrew will close.
All right. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are excited to announce that our next event will be July 16th, featuring Patrick Rickards, the Executive Director of Life After Hate, an organization that focuses on violent extremism and its motivations. I want to emphasize that together we are the facilitators of change and the empowerment of individuals in our communities. Regardless of the amount, your generous donation to the Social Justice Speaker Series helps ensure that education and awareness remain powerful tools for making a difference in our community. The donation link and the mailing address are available in the chat if you would like to support us. For those registered for continuing education, I invite you to complete the CE evaluation via the link in the chat to receive your certificate. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
Okay.
Mark.
I usually just stay till everybody leaves just to make sure there's no other questions or comments.
Usually the
Thank
same
you.
here too. I got a dip. I'm in my office, so I gotta head out. And I'm under a tornado watch right now, so I don't know. I'm gonna
Oh my
get going.
God.
But yeah, it was wonderful. Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, Kyler.
Thank you, Kyler. Bye-bye.
All right. Looks like everybody's gone except for Brian.
Right,
Good.
right.
All right.
There
Well,
you
thank
go.
you very much. That was fun.
Thank you,
I learned a
Robin.
lot. And,
You created a great communication and interactions